You walk into a grocery store, head down the canned goods aisle, and reach for a tin of tuna, a can of black beans, or a basic soup. It is a reflex. For decades, the aluminum or steel tin has been the ultimate symbol of security, a cheap, indestructible vault keeping food fresh for years. But right now, that security is an illusion. The price on the shelf looks stable, but behind the scenes, the data tells a completely different story. If you are shopping for canned food the same way you always have, picking the same brands, trusting the same aisles, and assuming the prices only fluctuate by a few cents, you are walking directly into an economic trap. I went through the actual data. Corporate earnings calls, trade documents, import records, and maritime shipping logs. What I found is a systemic squeeze. There are 15 specific canned foods being hit by intense cost pressures that the average shopper has no idea exist yet. Some of these everyday items are being squeezed from two directions at once. One of them is currently being hit from three completely separate angles simultaneously. The pricing you see on the store shelves today is lagging. It reflects corporate contracts signed 6 to 9 months ago. The contracts being negotiated right now behind closed doors are drastically different. This countdown from 15 to 1 is not just a shopping list. It is a roadmap of what is about to become a luxury item, and a guide on exactly what is worth buying today before the real-world data catches up to the retail tags. Take a look at how this ecosystem actually functions. Most people assume that when food prices rise, it is because the crop failed or the farm workers demanded higher wages. In the world of commercial canning, the food inside is often the cheapest part of the equation. The real battleground is the packaging, the international trade tariffs, and the invisible regulatory nets that are tightening around US ports of entry. We are looking at a classic convergence of unrelated crises. A drought in Central America, a trade war tariff on European steel, and a sudden maritime conservation law in the Pacific have nothing to do with each other. They were drafted by different people, in different years, for completely different reasons. Yet all three of these structural forces are colliding in the exact same square foot of your local supermarket aisle right now. This creates a massive anomaly for the consumer. Store brands and national labels are currently locked in an artificial price gap. You see a name brand can of tomatoes next to a generic store brand, and you buy the cheaper one, feeling like you hacked the system. But that gap is not a reflection of value, it is a timing gap. Major corporations absorb or pass down supply chain spikes at different intervals based on their quarterly contract windows. When those windows slam shut later this fiscal year, the floor moves. And in this economy, floors only move in one direction. The scale of this problem goes far beyond a few extra dimes at the cash register. We are witnessing the quiet restructuring of grocery store resilience. When the chief executive officers of multi-billion-dollar food conglomerates start telling their institutional investors under legal obligation that they can no longer absorb domestic supply deficits, the warning shots have already been fired. They are telling the market that the system is maxed out. The ultimate paradox of the modern pantry is that the very items we rely on for long-term stability and economic survival are the most systemically exposed products on the entire retail market. They depend on hyper-globalized supply chains for raw, tin-specific steel derivatives that the domestic market physically cannot produce enough of, and foreign fishing fleets operating under shifting international treaties. If any single link in that chain rusts, the entire shelf changes. Over the next 20 minutes, we are going to break down the hard numbers, the direct corporate disclosures, and the hidden mechanisms affecting 15 staples you probably have sitting in your kitchen right now. We will look at why a basic vegetable can is actually a metal pricing risk, why your favorite comfort soup is locked in a tariff war, and how a triple-threat regulatory storm is about to fundamentally alter the availability of the most common protein in America. This is the reality of the shelf, and the clock is ticking on today's prices. To understand how the modern supermarket shelf became so vulnerable, it is necessary to trace the structural roots of the current packaging and trade crisis back to specific regulatory and corporate decisions made over the last decade. The standard tin can is an engineering marvel, but its economic foundation relies on a fragile international supply network. A significant turning point occurred in March 2018, when the United States government implemented Section 232 tariffs, imposing a 25% import duty on foreign steel and a 10% duty on aluminum. While intended to protect domestic manufacturing, these measures immediately altered the cost metrics for food processors. Commercial canning requires a very specific material known as tin plate, which is thin sheet steel coated with a microscopic layer of tin. Domestic steel mills historically focused production on heavier, more lucrative products for the automotive and construction sectors, leaving American food manufacturers dependent on specialized foreign imports from nations like Japan, South Korea, Germany, and the Netherlands. The reliance on overseas tin plate created an immediate structural deficit. According to trade data from the Consumer Brands Association, which represents major food and beverage companies, domestic manufacturers have long been forced to more than half of the tin plate required to sustain the US food supply. When the Department of Commerce denied hundreds of tariff exclusion requests submitted by food packagers, the domestic processing industry faced a permanent cost penalty. Corporate filings reveal that between 2018 and 2024, the baseline manufacturing cost of a standard three-piece food can rose by more than 40%. This increase was driven not by the value of the green beans or sweet corn inside, But by the escalating cost of the metal container itself, simultaneously the domestic manufacturing sector contracted. The closures of prominent domestic tin mill operations, such as the idling of specific production lines in West Virginia and California by major steel corporations, further constrained local supply. This internal deficit forced massive food conglomerates, including Campbell Soup Company and Conagra Brands, to enter the international spot market for raw packaging materials, exposing them directly to global shipping volatility. When maritime freight rates surged during the global logistical bottlenecks of the early 2020s, the landing cost of imported steel container components tripled. The geographic trap extends to agricultural production lines across the southern border. Mexico has long served as the primary winter garden for the United States, providing a massive share of the fresh and processed tomatoes, paste, and legumes found on American shelves. However, over the past 3 fiscal years, the Mexican agricultural sector has suffered under severe structural hydrological deficits. Data from the North American Drought Monitor indicates that major growing regions in states like Sinaloa, Sonora, and Chihuahua experience prolonged exceptional drought conditions, with reservoir levels dropping below 15% capacity. In its annual agricultural forecasts, the U.S. Department of Agriculture documented a consecutive 3% annual decline in Mexican tomato export volumes entering the U.S. market. This supply reduction caused raw commodity prices to spike at the border. The problem is further compounded by strict regulatory changes. The U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency has dramatically increased its enforcement actions under the Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act and related withhold release orders. These federal mandates require absolute supply chain traceability down to the raw material level. Because global supply chains frequently blend raw agricultural commodities from various regions during regional processing, major shipments of tomato paste and canned legumes have faced extended detentions at ports of entry, including Laredo and Otay Mesa. When a single shipping container of concentrated tomato paste is detained for compliance verification, it incurs storage fees, delays downstream packaging plants, and disrupts the delivery schedules of regional distribution centers. This friction directly explains the artificial price gap currently observed between national name brands and corporate store brands. National brands typically operate on rolling quarterly procurement contracts, meaning they adjust their wholesale prices rapidly to protect corporate profit margins when raw material costs rise. Conversely, large retail chains negotiating private label store brands utilize massive multi-year volume commitments that delay the immediate impact of inflation for the consumer. According to corporate financial reports from major supermarket chains, these private label contracts act as a temporary buffer, absorbing cost spikes for 6 to 9 months longer than national labels. However, this delay creates a false sense of consumer security. As these long-term agreements expire, retail corporations face substantial wholesale price increases from their contract packers, forcing an abrupt upward adjustment of store brand shelf prices to match the broader market reality. The meat and poultry processing sectors face an even steeper logistical hurdle due to strict thermal processing mandates. The U.S. Food and Drug Administration enforces rigid regulations for low-acid canned foods, which include beef stews, poultry soups, and meat-based chiles. Under these guidelines, manufacturers must utilize commercial retort sterilization systems, heating sealed containers to temperatures between 240 and 250 degrees Fahrenheit, under intense pressure to eliminate the risk of botulinum toxin. Achieving these temperatures requires immense natural gas and electrical power consumption. Between 2022 and 2026, industrial energy tariffs in major processing states like Ohio, Illinois, and Pennsylvania climbed steadily, adding a hidden operational cost to every single production run. Because meat-based products require longer sterilization cycles than simple high-acid fruits or low-density vegetables, the energy cost per unit is substantially higher. Facing simultaneous pressure from protein costs, steel tariffs, and energy rates, food manufacturers have quieted production lines or turned to volume reduction. The Consumer Brands Association publicly warned that sustained input pressures put thousands of domestic food manufacturing jobs at risk, leading companies to implement shrinkflation tactics. By reducing the net weight of a can by half an ounce while maintaining identical exterior dimensions and label graphics, corporations offset margin compression without triggering immediate consumer backlash at the point of sale. This historical trajectory demonstrates that today's escalating prices are not a sudden anomaly, but the inevitable consequence of a decade of accumulating structural friction, regulatory mandates, and geographic realignments. The current operational reality inside the corporate boardrooms of major food manufacturers exposes the immediate consequences of these structural traps. In executive communications for fiscal year 2026, Campbell Soup Company Chief Executive Officer Mick Bazin disclosed under strict regulatory accountability to institutional shareholders that import tariffs on steel and aluminum account for more than 50% of the corporation's total projected DUT expenditures. The disclosure clarified a critical structural dependency. The company physically cannot source a sufficient volume of domestic steel derivatives possessing the precise technical specifications required for modern high-speed canning lines. Consequently, the commercial floor price of foundational products like canned chicken noodle soup cannot be maintained at historical baselines. forcing a direct pass-through of regulatory costs to retail shelves. This material constraint is not isolated to single-ingredient vegetable packs or simple broths. For meat-based products such as the St. Kills Dinty Moore beef stew, the supply shock multiplies across three distinct commodity vectors simultaneously: volatile domestic cattle pricing, rising industrial vegetable inputs, and escalating starch transport costs. Because these thick, dense meat products require significantly longer commercial retort cycles to safely reach sterilization thresholds, they are exceptionally exposed to rising industrial utility tariffs. To protect operating margins without triggering immediate consumer resistance through conspicuous retail price hikes, major manufacturers have widely deployed subtle volume reductions. Trade audit records from early 2026 reveal a systemic industry pattern where standard 15-ounce containers are quietly replaced by 14.5-ounce or 14.1-ounce variants utilizing identical exterior dimensions. A mechanism that effectively reduces the volume of food delivered per dollar spent while maintaining identical shelf footprints. A similar, highly concentrated supply risk characterizes the import chain for specialty cooking staples like canned coconut milk. Brands such as Thai Kitchen and Chowco rely entirely on processing facilities located within Thailand, as no scalable domestic processing infrastructure exists within the United States. Trade documentation confirms that these specific products possess zero regional geographic buffers. Any adjustments to the United States' generalized system of preferences or targeted bilateral tariff schedules pass directly to the consumer within a single shipping cycle. Meanwhile, the staple protein sector has entered a period of unprecedented regulatory friction due to the official implementation of the National Marine Fisheries Service import prohibitions under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. Effective January 1, 2026, the federal government enacted strict seafood import bans against foreign commercial fisheries that failed to secure official comparability findings regarding marine mammal bycatch mitigation. Under this active framework, approximately 240 distinct fisheries across 46 exporting nations have been denied comparability findings. Porters of record bringing fish products into American ports must now navigate a complex, mandatory electronic compliance system. Every shipment originating from restricted regions requires a comprehensive certification of admissibility, which must be executed by an authorized official of the exporting nation and verified electronically through the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Automated Commercial Environment System using the Document Imaging System. The certification requires exact declarations of harmonized tariff schedule numbers, exact weights in kilograms, designated fishing gear codes, vessel names, and flags of registry. Failure to complete the final import verification within 24 hours of arrival triggers mandatory product detentions at the port of entry. GHY International Show 2, this intensive verification process directly intersects with the expanded federal ban on Russian origin seafood. The restriction explicitly targets third-country processing loops, closing a major historical loophole where Russian caught pollock, cod, and salmon were shipped to secondary nations like China or South Korea for processing and canning before being legally imported into the United States. With these massive international volumes legally barred from the domestic supply chain, corporate buyers have converged on a drastically narrowed pool of compliant suppliers, primarily located in Alaska, Canada, Norway, and Japan. This sudden consolidation of purchasing power has triggered an immediate supply deficit for widely consumed canned proteins. While premium brands marketing transparent, traceable sourcing lines offer structural stability against these regulatory blockades, they do so at a permanent cost premium that removes them from the traditional budget category. Even the most basic staple alternatives, such as canned kidney, pinto, and black beans managed by corporations like Bush's Best and Goya, are feeling the ripples of this broad systemic realignment. While these items remain the most mathematically efficient method of acquiring shelf-stable protein due to their minimal baseline crop costs, the baseline packaging squeeze remains absolute. The long-term durability of these legumes, established by low-moisture packing protocols validated by the National Center for Home Food Preservation, has made them the primary focus of large-scale institutional storage models, including the extensive home storage network operated by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. As commercial buyers, institutional entities, and retail consumers simultaneously increase their order volumes to hedge against broader grocery inflation, procurement backlogs at regional distribution hubs have steadily grown. The intersection of material scarcity, strict maritime conservation laws, closed trade loops, and heightened port enforcement has eliminated the traditional buffer zones that once insulated the retail consumer from global regulatory shifts.